Good afternoon. Hello again. And welcome to our Analytical Corner on Transforming Social Safety Nets, a Digital Revolution. My name is John Bishop. I work in the Secretary's Department of the IMF. And before we begin, may I once again ask you to silence your cell phones. Now I'm going to invite my colleagues Emine Hanedar and Nicolo Bird onto the stage. They'll present for about 10 minutes. Then we'll open up the floor to your questions for about 15 minutes. All right, so let's just get to the main event. Everyone, please, warm welcome for Emine and Nicolo.
Millions of people globally live in poverty. Supporting the most vulnerable is key for empowerment and inclusive growth. How can governments reach and support them? Hi, my name is Emine Hanedar, and I'm a senior economist in the Fiscal Affairs Department.
And my name is Nicolo Bird. I am also an economist in the Fiscal Affairs Department.
We want to start this analytical corner with a small experiment that we hope you will join. We have a prize for some members in the audience. So please raise your hand and keep them up if you have any form of a photo ID that shows your name and birthday on it. I see many hands. That's wonderful. Then, please keep your hands raised if your birthday is between today, October 21, and Sunday, October 27. Oh. I see a few winners. That's great. Thank you for participating. You can lower your hands. For all those winners, or in other words, eligible people, please meet us at the end of this analytical corner outside. And please bring your IDs so we can identify you, verify your birthday, and pay you your prize.
Let's talk now about social transfers, also known as social safety nets. In this experiment, it was relatively easy to identify and verify eligible people and provide their prizes. Now, imagine you are working for a government in a large developing economy. You are tasked to provide cash transfers to poor or vulnerable individuals across the country with limited information available at your disposition. This is a much more complicated challenge. Nonetheless, our experiment helps us focus on three key components in delivering transfers: identifying beneficiaries, verifying eligibility, and ensuring timely payments. We refer to this framework as IVP, which stands for Identify, Verify, Pay. This approach is essential for creating effective social protection systems that reduce poverty and promote inclusive growth. Leveraging government technology, or shortly GovTech, can enhance each of these components, making the systems more efficient, adaptive, and accessible. Today, this is more important than ever given the shocks we encounter globally. The IVP framework emphasizes the importance of each step in the process. Identifying individuals ensures that we know each potential beneficiary's identity. Verifying eligibility confirms that support is directed to those who need it the most, enhancing trust in the system. Finally, paying beneficiaries in a timely manner ensures that assistance reaches a larger group of people when they need it. Each of these components works in tandem to create a robust and efficient social safety net.
Now, let's talk about each of these steps in depth. The first step is to identify who is who. Most of you have a passport, driver's license, or a national ID. However, more than 30% of adults in low-income developing countries do not have an official ID. And these are often the most vulnerable people. Accurate identification is vital for ensuring that the right person receives the support. When we streamline this process, we minimize leakage to those who do not need the help. This is important, especially as fiscal space is often limited. As such, investing in civil registration and vital statistics is a first important step in building inclusive policies. Digitalization can speed up this process significantly where traditional registries do not exist. For example, biometrics automatically measures the unique physical characteristics, such as fingerprints, facial recognition, to determine a person's identity. This unique biometric data can register a large share of the population in a reliable and fast manner. A prime example is India's biometric identification system that has provided a biometric ID for over its billion citizens. Another example is Pakistan, which leveraged its national biometric ID to identify beneficiaries. Then, this ID is combined with information from other databases, such as the social registry, property records, and tax returns.
The second task is to verify and target support to those who most need it. This step is essential for building trust in social programs and preventing misuse of limited fiscal resources. When socioeconomic information about households is incomplete, governments do not know who is vulnerable or at risk of vulnerability in the event of shocks. Again, digital tools can help by enabling critical data exchanges across government registries and programs. A great example of this is Brazil's Cadastro Único. This information system, known as a social registry, brings together dozens of government databases to determine the eligibility of families qualifying for social programs. Thanks to innovations in GovTech, this centralized database ensures that resources are allocated efficiently, reaching those in most need. In the absence of social registries, countries are also increasingly using alternative methods of targeting the most vulnerable. For instance, by looking at digital data or mobile phone usage, or even electricity consumption data. An example of this is Togo, which, despite not having an existing information system, combined satellite imagery and household consumption data to identify the poorest areas and prioritize vulnerable individuals in the wake of COVID.
Last, governments require mechanisms to deliver economic support, which usually means paying cash. But easier said than done. Timely and reliable payment mechanisms are critical for the effectiveness of social safety nets. However, in emerging and developing economies, almost half of the population does not have a financial account. Thankfully, the rapid expansion of mobile communication provides opportunities. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, mobile phone ownership is high. During the pandemic, the Democratic Republic of the Congo launched a cash transfer program that paid cash through mobile phones. By leveraging mobile technology, they were able to deliver cash assistance quickly and securely to those impacted by the crisis. This not only reduced the risks associated with cash or in-kind distribution, but also demonstrated the power of digital solutions in times of urgent need. The increase in national ID coverage and availability of socio-economic information makes opening bank accounts also easier, which is another key channel to transfer benefits and enhance financial inclusion.
In conclusion, digitalizing social safety nets isn't just about technology for technology's sake. It's about improving lives and fostering a stronger connection between citizens and their government. To fully realize the potential of GovTech, the government must also ensure cybersecurity, accessibility, and privacy. In summary, in order to reap the benefits from digitalization, countries need to strengthen institutional capacity to build more robust and adaptive social safety nets. For this, governments need to do three things: identify, verify, pay.
Thank you, Nicolo Emine. And there is actually a prize. Am I right? Okay, so there is actually a prize for those of you who are eligible. I know there are rules against IMF officials receiving presents, but I don't know about giving prizes. So, all right. So
it's a small prize.
Small prize. Small prize. No ethical boundaries were broken here. All right. So let's open up the floor for the questions. We have colleagues with microphones. If you have a question, raise your hand. We'll get you a microphone. When you ask your question, just if you could stand up, give us your name, affiliation, and then a brief question. Do we have any questions from the audience there? Yes, right off the bat, once again.
Hi, Max, University of Maryland, MBA. So out of the 3 steps, identifying, verifying, and paying, which do you think has the most significant challenges in actually being put into practice?
Do we take them? I think, as usual, everything depends, and it depends on the country context. But often, globally speaking, we think that probably verification is more difficult. Why? Because with identify, with the use of biometrics and biometrics ID, where you have a unique ID, it makes it easier to have really a unique ID so that that's easier to know who is who, and in a reliable way. With the mobile phone and also with the financial inclusion coming up more and more, that also makes it a little bit easier. Verify is very often a bit more complicated. Why? Because we're very often talking about low-income developing countries. As you know, there is a lot of informal economic activity in these economies. And as you know, we want to target to those who are either poor or vulnerable after a shock. And it's very difficult if there is a large informal economy to know, is this person poor? And even if you have a social registry, it takes time to update it. But thankfully, we saw during the pandemic that there are some very nice and creative ways to still be able to verify eligibility.
Great. Are there any other questions? Yes, in the back there with the...
Hi, my name is Nikki. I'm an undergraduate economics student at Georgetown University. So you spoke a bit to the cybersecurity challenges involved with data collection. I was wondering, since identification and verification involve the centralization of a large amount of biometric and electricity consumption data usage information about populations, what are some of the cybersecurity solutions that these governments have employed? Thank you.
Thank you. This is actually a very important question because privacy is a national priority and it's also a national must. So countries should take the necessary precautions in terms of data privacy, governance. They should have the right laws, but they also should make sure that data that is sensitive should be encrypted and that there is a regular audit of the security, cybersecurity. And for this, they can also work with international organizations and other peers to see what are the internationally accepted ways or best practices in terms of protecting data and privacy.
Okay, great. Do we have any more questions from the audience? I want to go to this side over here. We have someone with their hand raised back, waiting patiently. Right over there, yes.
Hi, my name is Zaid. I'm a government and economics student at Georgetown University. To speak to the identify point, is there existing research on what methods have been used to increase participation in programs, in like identification programs in countries where participation is very low?
So, I mean, at first there needs to be a big part of when we talk about identification is about making sure everyone has a government-issued ID. This is also a key part of having inclusion. It's not just about cash transfers, for example, but it's also thinking about other types of social spending or tax. It's to sort of build trust between governments and citizens. So this is a key step, and what we see in a lot of, as Amina mentioned earlier, when we see a lot of developing countries, emerging economies, is that there is not universal coverage. And this is really a helpful step for policymakers to start implementing other policies and more complex or more, it's a key part of digital building blocks that allow for more complex responses, wider responses. In terms of thinking of ways to have citizens be more involved, I mean, there's one interesting takeaway from the COVID response is that a lot of governments introduced portals, online portals, where citizens could input their IDs, could import their phone numbers, and this created a demand-led database for governments that did not have access to registries of beneficiaries to sort of use as a starting point to start issuing cash transfers in the wake of emergencies. So we see also digitalization is helping to create also demand-led and new forms of interfaces to reach out to communities and society.
Great. Yes, we have a question there with this gentleman.
Hi, this is Muzammil Aslam. I'm from Pakistan. I'm the finance advisor of one of the province. I was listening this conversation outside because the hall is jam-packed. So you mentioned Pakistan about the digital program. We have two programs. One is Sehat Card, which is a universal coverage, health coverage for all the province people. And the other one is Benazir Income Support Program, which is about 9 million families. They are into this program. Everything is digital. And with the biometric, you can get your cash relief or as well as the universal health. But you have pointed one thing. With the technology, the transfer is cash, or much more easier. In Pakistan, if you want to get the mobile SIM, you need to do the biometric first. And your biometric connects with your national ID. But when these poor people goes to get their mobile SIM, the vendor who are selling the mobile SIMs, they're taking their 2 times or 3 times the thumb impression, and they are issuing the fake SIMs to the other people. So there is a possibility of, misusing of this facility through SIM, which is why I came in and I just wanted to tell this. And the another thing is we have the Social Security program, which is a universal health program for everyone. The point is before we just need to show the ID card. So many hospitals, they just keep the copy of the ID cards and they just fake invoice to the government. So I just recently came here and we introduced the biometric. If you want to get the health services, any family member have to do the biometric as well. So there are so many chances of fraud even in the technology age. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. I think probably you know better the Pakistani case than maybe we do. I would just say that the verification process is an iterative process. It's not a one-off thing. Of course, you need to create a system where you see what is working, what is not working, and try to address it. It's not necessarily just that from one day to the next, digitalization will solve everything. But basically, what happens in Pakistan, for example, through this social registry, you can reach a share of the population that would be unimaginable even 20 years ago. So I think there's a concern also of throwing the baby with the bathwater out when we think of people who are ineligible, people who receive transfers. Yes, that happens. Yes, something needs to be done to fine-tune that out. But let's not also lose the greater picture of inclusion and how critical that is for economic growth and cohesion.
Great, thank you. And thank you for that information from the on the ground. We have a question right here in the front.
Hi, thanks for the great panel. My name is Judith Hellesine of Hellesine Associates. So my question is, actually I have 2 questions. One is, there's a smaller subset of countries who do not have who may have a digital ID program, but do not have the appropriate policies and regulations on data governance and data protection. And how do you see that evolving in that other sense? And then the second one was on also some countries may not have a biometrics program, but they have a digital ID program going on. And do you or some way of identifying and authenticating people online that is not necessarily a biometrics? And where do you see that going? Are they diametrically opposed to each other, or can they be, done in different paths? So thanks.
Yes, for countries that have a biometric ID or an ID system in place, but they have not yet the right regulation, governance, the right practices, and also the right training, because it also requires training of people implementing. Like the example of Pakistan, it also requires that someone who is enrolling them knows how to do it. So what we see is, first of all, what we see is that usually in terms of a crisis, usually you can very quickly scale these things up. But when you talk about the right data protection, sometimes it's helpful to start with a small pilot. We know many countries, like in India, they have done this, in South Africa. They start with a small pilot in one area, and they try it out. They have of course, you need to have your laws in place. You need to make sure that there is data security, and then you start with a small pilot complementary to what you have already, to make sure that if there is anything with the program, you can fine-tune, that you don't say, hey, the program is not working and now you don't get your benefit and people are in trouble. No, you have that program next to the program that you had already. And for this also, I would like to also mention that the IMF and many other international development partners do support this, either with our capacity development or with other tools we have. And then you had another question on the biometric ID. Yes, I found it a nice, funny question because in some countries, when you look at many advanced countries, for a long time they didn't have necessarily the biometric IDs. And the reason is that if you have already a solid way of identifying your beneficiaries or your population, you don't necessarily need to have the biometrics. What the benefit is of the biometrics is if there is a lack of a data system, if your birth certificates or your census or your national records are not yet to the speed that you want or to the comprehension that you want, biometric can help to fasten that process. But if you have already something and it's working, you don't have leakages, of course you don't need to immediately switch to biometrics. You can use that to still identify your beneficiaries.
Okay, wonderful. Some other questions. We have a lady right here, if we could bring her the microphone.
Hi, my name is Adriana Vitia. I'm from Mexico, but I'm doing my graduate studies here at Carnegie Mellon University. My question is if there's any preference or if it's ideal to have either a centralized database for all agencies to be looking for, or if countries are using like different databases and that's like duplicating the information of citizens and that's being worse in a case. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think one thing to avoid duplication is really starting with a form of ID system that is universal. You know, you have like a sort of starting ground. This helps a lot when it comes to having information systems, when it comes to social protection, cash transfers. There are different ways you can design these systems. I mean, it's pretty complex. It gets quite technical, but there are different systems. So one, for example, and it depends a lot on what level of capacity you have, administration you have. So if you're a country with not a long history of cash transfers or social safety nets, you want to start with like a program that is really targeted to the poor and vulnerable, for example, or certain contingencies that are very specific. But then as you grow, as you start to have tens of programs, dozens of programs, and you as a government planner, you really want to have a bigger picture of how is the government supporting in households. It really helps to either integrate these different individual registries. So this is known as an integrated beneficiary registry. But there's also this concept of social registries. And social registry is when you bring together all the different types of databases that the government has with information of individuals, and you have also characteristics of household, poverty profiles, location, household composition. So a social registry doesn't necessarily make sense if you're a country with very limited footprint, let's say, in terms of social protection systems. But if you're a country that has dozens of programs and you really want to try to target specific vulnerabilities, it provides you much more room to maneuver and enact policy. So that trade-off is basically the main point.
Great. So we're almost out of time here. Before I wrap things up, I want to hand it back to you. Big picture time. What is the big takeaway you want our audience to leave with from this presentation?
So the main takeaway is what we saw during the pandemic and during emergency responses, that countries who had initially already some kind of a digital infrastructure in place, they were able to reach more people in a faster way. But what we also observed, that countries that did initially not have that many digital infrastructure were still able to reach some of their population. So what we really would like to urge is to use the technology and to proactively invest in digitalization and the right data security and privacy issues, so that once a shock hits, you as the government can do three things: identify, verify, pay.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Warm round of applause.